So elastic IPs in AWS are addresses that are just simply static IPv4 addresses. That means that you'll always have the same address no matter what. And so the idea is that we have a few different use cases. The first use case will be when you restart an EC2 instance and its IP address will change. This happens every time you restart it. You might end up with a new IP address, or if let's say you have a workload and you stop it, or so you terminate and you spin up a new one, it will absolutely have a new IP address. This could be an issue if you have something that relies on the hard-coded IP address. It will break. So, most systems try to stay away from relying on static IP addresses, but when you're integrating with things externally from AWS, or you are working with legacy systems, sometimes there's no way around it, okay? For use case number 2, when an EC2 instance fails, you might want to use the same IP address in the case of a failover instance. So you have more than one instance, and you just want that IP address to carry over. So Elastic IP address allows you to do that because you can remap it to another instance or a network interface card. Elastic IPs are region specific, so you can't use them across regions. Elastic IPs are drawn from the Amazon pool of IPv4 addresses, so as long as they have one, you can get one. Elastic IPs are charged $1 for each that is allocated and unassociated because they want you to use them, not to just allocate them and never use them. So they incentivize that, incentivize you returning them back to the pool when unused by by charging for it. Elastic IPs are subject to the new IPv4 charge, which is for any public IP address that you're using. This is the whole thing about there's a limited amount of IPv4 addresses, so they're kind of at a premium, and you should try to use IPv6 where you can, assuming that they work as expected. Elastic IPs can be associated or unassociated to an EC2 instance or an ENI, an Elastic Network Interface card, which really, in theory, they're both just going to the ENI because the EC2 instance has a network attached card to it, and they're always going and pointing to that. But understand that you can point it to either the NIC or the EC2 instance. If you notice that I keep using different words, it's because an ENI is a NIC and it is a network attached card. So there's a lot of ways that we can say that the same thing 10 times over. So I try to utilize more language there so you're in better shape to understand that. You might be wondering, well, this is for IPv4. What do we do for IPv6? Well, IPv6 doesn't really require Elastic IP because addresses are already globally unique. Is there static IP addresses for IPv6? I guess so. But anyway, my research pointed that we don't need them for IPv6. And so this is really more about IPv4. So Elastic IP does not support IPv6 for obvious reasons. Let's go take a look at some CLI commands so we can just better understand the workflow when working with these Elastic IPs. The first is allocating your EIP. There is one option there where you can specify the network board group, where you can pick very specific AZs, local zones, or wavelength zones. I didn't even know that, so this is something that doesn't show up in the UI, but you can really narrow down exactly what kind of network you're trying to target. So I guess it works outside of just your plain old VPCs. We have to associate our Elastic IP address. So we need to associate the Elastic IP to an instance. You could also use the network interface ID to associate to a network interface. And now thinking about it, I'm not even sure if the UI allows you to directly associate to a network interface card. So maybe the only way to do it is through the CLI command. I'm not sure. We can disassociate our EIPs. That's pretty straightforward. And then we can deallocate or release our EIP back to the pool. There's a little bit more. So this is where we get kind of into like more interesting things that you can do with Elastic IPs, but I never ever do them because they're more exotic. But you could have a reassociation. So you can tell an address to always attempt to reassociate with the same instance or network interface in the case of a failure or restart. So that is an example of having that failover example. You can tell it to explicitly not to reassociate, which I'm not sure why that's an option, but anyway, that is an explicit option you can have because I think by default, it already says not to do it. So there's that. You can recover. So I didn't know this. I only found it out through the AWS CLI, but you can attempt to, if available, recover a specific address during allocation. So if you had like your favorite address that you used before, you could try to get it back. Or maybe you someone on your team accidentally put it back in the pool and you want to get it back because things are hard-coded. So as long as no one else has taken it, you can probably get it back if you're lucky. You can also bring your own IPv4 address. This is something I really didn't know until, again, going through the CLI, but you can allocate one from a pool. So there is some way to import a public IPv4 pool into it as a separate step. So that's really interesting. But yeah, so there you go. That's Elastic IP.